First of all, in the book of Revelation, we have two groups of 144,000. And there's always been much debate and even controversy if or not they are the same group. That is a related but separate issue. We have the 144,000 in chapter 7 and the 144,000 later on appearing in chapter 14. Are they the same group or are they not? Well, that's not the question that was asked, but bearing in mind that there are two groups of 144,000, or at least one group that appears twice, depending on your perspective or point of view. We do, in fact, deal with this issue in the book Harpezo, I believe. Nonetheless, let's address the specific question. Once the faithful church is removed, the salvific purposes of God refocus centrally, focally, on Israel and the Jews. God goes back to behaving the way he did in the Old Testament. The age of grace has come to an end. Now he's the God of wrath once again. Those same judgments you see in the book of Exodus coming on Egypt are recapitulated in the book of Revelation. The choshek, darkness, dam, blood, spardiah, the frogs, and so forth. Those things are replayed in the book of Revelation the way they were in the book of Exodus. We also see there's a tribulational temple in Revelation chapter 11. We also see that there's a battle at Armageddon, and so forth. We see God's focus goes back to Israel and the Jews. The 144,000 of Revelation 7 and Revelation 14 derive from the prophecies of Jacob in the book of Genesis, when he gives those prophecies to his son in Genesis chapter 49 to the 12 tribes. That is the basis of it. It is the culmination of Jacob's prophecies to his sons, which were not simply prophecies to the sons per se, but they were prophecies to the tribes. Fully consistent with the motif and the focus and the emphasis that once the faithful church is removed, God turns his purposes back to dealing with Israel and the Jews. And in fact, he begins doing that even before the church is removed to a degree. But once the church is removed, that becomes the bullseye of what he's doing. These mistaken beliefs of the tribulation saints and so forth are amplified way out of proportion to anything the scriptures actually teach. Once the faithful church is gone, God is dealing with Israel. That is why you see the motifs and literary imagery of the Old Testament in the book of Revelation so robustly and acutely. Again, consistent with this Hebraic motif, with this Judaic eschatology, the 144,000 are literal Jews. To the best of my understanding, they are actual literal Jews. Now the question becomes, how do you determine their tribal identity, apart from the fact that God knows? Well, let's understand there are different ways we can approach this question. To begin with, the 12 tribes were not simply the names of tribes. They were the names of provinces or shires or counties, 12 governed regions of the nation. And understand, when somebody would marry across tribal lines a woman, she would take on the identity of the other tribe. We also see in the revivals of King Asa that faithful people from the 10 backslidden northern tribes would come south. And in the Babylonian captivity, those Jews who were in Babylon from the Assyrian captivity returned, at least some of them did, with the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. We know that these tribal identities existed all the way till New Testament times, because James writes his epistle, writing to Jewish believers, to the 12 tribes. Additionally, there are Jewish historical sources in the Mishnah and things of this nature, affirming what the New Testament says. So, how can we understand it? Well, to begin with, it could be a regional identity in part. He's from this county or shire or province. He's from the province of Simeon or from the province of Dan, something of that nature. Now, we see this in the book of Judges to a great degree, in the story of Samson and so forth, when you had a migration of other tribes to the south from Dan. Be that as it may, let's look further. Today we have something called mitochondrial DNA. That technology exists and it's getting better all the time. We can trace ancestry biologically. If you could get enough DNA signatures from bone tissue degenerates at a much, much slower pace. The density of osteocytes is such that entropy affects it at a much slower pace. We have bones that are thousands of years old from all kinds of civilizations. Celtic bones from Ireland, Chinese bones from China, and also Semitic bones from Israel. If you could get enough DNA signatures from enough bones from each of the tribal regions of Israel and determine tribal characteristics in the chromosomal makeup and in the mitochondrial DNA signatures and match it with Jews today, it's not unthinkable you could come up with a tribal identity, at least approximation of it. Until now, they tried to go by names. Reubenstein, oh, his ancestors must have been from the tribe of Reuben. Or priestly names like Levi or Levinson or Segal, that must be from the tribe of Levi. Well, there may be a truth in that anthropologically, but I would not rule out the possibility of progressive research in mitochondrial DNA that God knew would one day be possible, to make it possible to determine the tribal ancestry of specific tribes of Israel. And not only of the Jews, but of other tribes. Let's remember, mitochondrial DNA has debunked the Book of Mormon in its erroneous claims, bogus claims that North American Indians are Semites. No North American Indians are where the anthropologists always said they were from. Siberia, they came across the Aleutians and Umiaks and came down into America from Alaska. The anthropologists were proven right by the mitochondrial DNA. The Book of Mormon was proven wrong. Well, this technology is always getting better. There have been tremendous leaps in what we know of mitochondrial DNA even in the last 4 to 5 years. When I was in university, we didn't know about any cytoplasmic DNA. We only knew there was RNA in the cytoplasm. We didn't know there was DNA. We thought that all DNA was in the nucleus. Now we know better. And 10 years from now, we're going to know better still, in all likelihood. Then, of course, there's the third element of it being tribal regions. We can see at least 3 to 4 possible ways where tribal identity can be determined. It might not have been possible 20 years ago, but it's possible now, and it's going to be more possible in the future. So yes, I do, to the best of my understanding, remain convinced that the 144,000 are literal Jews.